The Honourable Sir Roger Douglas.
Mr Speaker, unfortunately the budget policy statement once again, I believe, demonstrates the government's major deficit, and that is the deficit of imagination. The government clearly lacks the guts to do what's right, to turn the New Zealand economy around from where it is today. They have decided, in terms of this policy statement, to once again take the soft options. To hell with New Zealand so long as the government survives. And once again they've decided to borrow and hope. The budget statement says, and I quote, "The key issues and themes are summarised below, but the government told us its primary focus for the budget 2000 will be on lifting and sustaining economic growth." Now, I want to predict, Mr Speaker, that they will in fact fail. They will do substantially better than Labor and the Greens did, but essentially they're not doing enough to ensure real growth occurs in this economy. And if we ever wanted a wake-up call, then I suggest that we got it yesterday. And that was the announcement of the latest productivity figures. And what they showed us was that we are going backwards. The reality of improving our living standards and catching Australia is a promise, but not a reality. The fact is, Mr Speaker, is that productivity is critical. A decrease in productivity, as we had over the last 12 months, means that we are now getting less output for the same amount of input. In other words, we are getting less for what we put in. Between 2006 and 2009, under Labor and the Green, New Zealand experienced negative labour productivity, and that's the first time that's happened in 20 years. Overall, GDP decreased by 2.2% because of your mad policies, actually, that's why. Without higher productivity per week, there can be no higher wages. And that is the point. The only way we will have real increases in wages is by way of real increases in productivity. And the fact is very simple. The fact is very simple, Mr Speaker, and I want New Zealanders to ponder this. Had New Zealand between 2000 and 2009 had the same labour productivity as we had between 1984 and 2000, then wages in this country would be more than $100 over and above what they are now. The average wage today is $538. If we had had the same productivity in the last 9 years as we had in the 15 or 16 years before it, wages today would be $107 higher, and New Zealanders would be earning $645 and not $538. And that's what a Labor and Green government did to the people of New Zealand. They increased government spending by more than 50%, and the result of that was a rapid decline in labour productivity. I might add, capital productivity and multi-factor productivity also declined, but put that aside, in labour. And that's their legacy. $107 a week lower wages because of the madness that the member for Wainuiomata and his colleagues introduced. Mr Speaker, I want to touch on, before I come back to the main proposition, that is lifting and sustaining economic growth, I just wanted to touch on one or two other points that have been raised in this document, the budget policy statement. Mr Speaker, there's a lot of talk in the budget policy statement about fiscal policy and about tax. The fact is, and the fact that we might adjust the tax system to our advantage. I want to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that the impact on the New Zealand economy is not so much from the design. Sure, you can design the system better, but if the government is spending 40% plus with local government and local government are spending 45% of GDP, then we have a problem. It doesn't matter how you design the tax system, you have a problem. And when you think of that, the burden of tax, that is the quantity of government expenditure, is about 85%. You might be able to improve the system by designing it a little better, but that only accounts and improves things at the margin. And what we need to do, I believe, Mr. Speaker, is to look at government expenditure, and until we reduce government expenditure and get it back to where it was 6 years ago at 29% of GDP, we're going to have a lot of trouble. And I do not personally support the increase in GST. I think it's unnecessary. I believe that if you take the compensation, if the honourable member will listen, if you take the GST, it brings in about $2.2 billion. But having made compensation, as the government intends to, for superannuitant, for those on benefits, etc., the net increase in the net revenue will be about $1 billion to $1.2 billion. That represents less than 2% of government expenditure. You can have the tax cuts if you're prepared to reduce government expenditure by 2%, less than 2%, and I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that I certainly will not be supporting the GST increase. On the other hand, it may well be that I'll be voting for it, Mr. Mallard, because that is part of a supply agreement that we have. And well, let's do it. Well, it's quite easy. I can justify, Mr. Mallard. I can justify that. I can justify that. Well, I mean, I might like the fact that National increased GST by 2.5%, but if the option is to go back to the mad policy that you had introduced over 2000 and 2009, it's a no-brainer what I'm going to do.
Retire.
Oh, well, you should have retired a long time ago. Mr. Speaker, if we are going...
3 minutes. Point of order, Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 30 seconds, our colleague has suggested that you should retire and that you had maintained mad policies.
Yes, I did hear that. I did earlier on to the member just come back to the point that the member cannot bring, or no member can bring the Speaker into the debate. So every time you say you or you're referring to the Speaker. And I don't intend to retire just yet. So, the Honourable Sir Roger Douglas.
Back to the main proposition, and that is trying to lift and sustain economic growth. Mr. Speaker, there are really 7 principles to follow if we're going to achieve that. And I think really that the government only have 2 of those under control, and that is the issue of monetary policy and the policies relating to free trade. But if we're really going to get a boost to this economy, then private enterprise has to play a much bigger part than it is at the moment. You simply cannot have 40% of GDP being spent by the government. I actually agreed with the leader of the Green Party in terms of what he said about infrastructure. If infrastructure improves New Zealand's growth, then well and good. But there is also the situation where the government is making investment decisions for political, not economic reasons. And I think personally a perfect example of that is Transmission Gully, whose cost-benefit ratio is below 1. That is, Treasury has estimated that it will cost far more